There are strange things going on with the theoretical performance and especially the amount of shader cores on the new Navi 31 chip. And no, the RX 7900 XTX does not have 12,288 cores, as all the previous leaks claimed, but only 6,144. Same with the 7900 XT, which does not have 10,752 cores, but only 5,376. That's only half the amount of stream processors everyone expected. At the same time, AMD is calculating the theoretical peak performance of the RDNA 3 GPUs based on the larger shader number, but the gaming performance is much more in line with the smaller shader number. So what's going on here? In order to understand the discrepancy between the insane increase in theoretical performance, which is almost 3 times that of the 6950 XT, and the much lower increase in gaming power, we have to take a look at 2 things. First, the ratio of teraflops to FPS, and second, how RDNA 3 actually differs from RDNA 2, because it seems to be a major architectural redesign. Let's start with the teraflops to FPS ratio. Theoretical peak throughput never had any impact on actual gaming performance. And in the past it was mostly AMD who fell victim to this. The Radeon RX Vega 64 had about 42% more theoretical FP32 performance than the GTX 1080, and we all know how that comparison turned out. Another good example is Nvidia's switch from Turing to Ampere, which came with a huge increase in shader cores and theoretical performance. The RTX 2080 Ti had 4,352 cores and 13.4 teraflops, while the RTX 3090 had a crazy 10,496 cores with an insane 35.7 teraflops. That's almost 2.7 times the amount of theoretical FP32 performance, but the 3090 was only around 50% faster at launch. This seems quite similar to the RDNA 3 numbers we're getting right now. That's because not all teraflops are created equal. In very simple terms, you can design shader cores to run more than one operation at the same time, but if you don't double every part of the core itself, which would take up a lot of silicon space, the increase in real-world performance is only a fraction of the theoretical uplift, since very specific conditions have to be met in order to fully utilize those dual or higher issue shaders. The interesting part is that with the switch from AMD's previous graphics core Next architecture to the first generation RDNA design, AMD specifically tried to avoid utilization problems. RDNA was designed from the ground up, so every shader would deliver the full potential in almost every scenario. The RX 5700 XT had 9.8 teraflops of FP32 performance. That's 24% less than the 12.9 teraflops Vega 64 had. But at the same time, the 5700 XT was 15 to 20% faster. That's because the shaders Vega was using were multi-issue and did not achieve high utilization in gaming. RDNA 2 didn't make any big changes to the shader design, and as a result kept the same high utilization cores of the original RDNA architecture. And because at the same time with Ampere, Nvidia made the switch to a large multi-issue design, the 6950 XT and its 21.5 teraflops is very competitive with the 35.7 teraflops of the 3090. As you can clearly see, FP32 performance does not equal gaming performance. So far, the entire RDNA GPU family has focused on high utilization shaders. And as a result, with the leaks that Navi 31 was supposed to have 12,288 cores, up from only 5,120 in Navi 21, the performance estimates went crazy. That's over twice the amount of shader cores, and with high clock speeds, it should result in at least twice the performance, or so we thought. That's where the second aspect of this analysis comes in, looking at the differences between RDNA 3 and RDNA 2. The most obvious part everyone is focusing on is the chiplet architecture. And while it is a major achievement and will have a huge impact on production costs and future GPU design, the overlooked part is that RDNA 3 also changed the shader architecture within. Different to RDNA and RDNA 2, RDNA 3 switches to a so-called dual-issue shader. It's not multi-issue as graphics core Next or current Nvidia architectures, and AMD has put a lot of work into making sure that the shaders will have a decent utilization rate. But each RDNA 3 stream processor can, in theory, handle twice as many computations as a RDNA 2 stream processor. On AMD's own spec sheet, the 7900 XTX is listed with 6144 stream processors. And if we compare that to the 5120 of the 6950 XT, that's only a 20% increase, adding the 10% higher gaming clock on top, and we get about 32% more performance versus Navi 21. As you can see, when we are estimating the performance based on the actual amount of stream processors instead of the FP32 rate, we get much lower numbers. Now AMD claims that the 7900 XTX is 50 to 70% faster than the 6950 XT. And here we can see the dual issue shaders in action. If RDNA 3 would have used the same shader core design as RDNA 2, again we would expect about 32% more performance based on the increase in stream processors and clock speed. But using new dual issue shaders adds another 20 to 40% on top, depending on game and workload. And with that knowledge, the performance numbers finally make sense, because the 61.4 teraflops of a full Navi 31 cannot be compared to the 21.5 teraflops of a full Navi 21, since the shader cores are different. I also want to touch on ray tracing performance, since a lot of people seem especially disappointed by it, and I guess we all expected a larger focus on ray tracing with RDNA 3. If we take a closer look, we can actually see that RDNA 3 has much better ray tracing implementation, but the expected performance gains fall short because of the dual issue approach. AMD is grouping all stream processors in so-called compute units. A full Navi 21 chip has 80 compute units. Each compute unit also includes one ray tracing core, but Navi 31 only increases the amount of compute units by 20% from 80 to 96, since the majority of performance gains are realized by switching to dual issue shaders, which does not increase the amount of compute units. If AMD would have used the same shader architecture as in RDNA 2, they would have added a lot more compute units, probably at least 120 or even more. But with only 96 compute units, the 7900 XTX only has 96 ray tracing cores. And while AMD has improved the performance of each RT core by about 50%, if we add that to the 20% more cores, that's still only 80% more ray tracing performance. It should be enough to compete with last-gen high-end Nvidia cards like the 3090, but I expect even a 4080 to be considerably faster in ray tracing. AMD could have increased the amount of ray tracing cores within each compute unit, but that would have been increasing the die size, and since AMD focused on creating a space-efficient architecture, ray tracing performance wasn't the priority. AMD clearly had a single focus for RDNA 3, a space-optimized and cost-efficient architecture. The chiplet approach outsources parts of the GPU that don't scale well with smaller nodes, so they can be produced on older and cheaper nodes. For the graphics die, instead of sticking with single issue shaders and increasing the amount of compute units by 50% or even more, AMD implemented dual issue shaders. This approach is much more space efficient, but also results in less performance than the raw FP32 numbers would indicate. And this approach also hampers the ray tracing performance, as there are only 16 more ray tracing cores. They might be 50% faster, but in turn, ray tracing performance still just scales at a similar rate as rasterization performance, instead of closing the gap to Nvidia. And on the topic of stream processors or shader cores, just like the teraflop numbers, the amount of shaders is also very theoretical. Nvidia claims the 4090 has over 16,000 shaders, but looking at it from a silicon point of view, it's just 1024 SIMDs with a wide multi-issue design. So how many shaders does the 7900 XTX really have? AMD clearly states it's 6144 stream processors, and coming from RDNA 2, that makes a lot of sense. They are just more capable. In theory, twice as much, in practice, way less. Both numbers are not wrong, but implying that Navi 31 has more than twice the amount of shaders as Navi 21 would be false, as we can clearly see from the gaming performance. Overall, I'm a bit disappointed by RDNA 3, but not because Navi 31 doesn't perform well. I'd argue it's actually really fast for how small it is, but because of what RDNA 3 could have been. I'm also curious as to why the 7900 XT is priced so close to the XTX, since it's using a binned down chip and less memory cache dies. I think the reason might be so AMD can still sell older RDNA 2 GPUs, or maybe the performance difference is lower than expected. For me, the RDNA 3 launch raised more questions than it answered. I will look at the architecture, the new AI cores, and specifically the chiplet design in a future video, once we have more details and independent performance numbers. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Also, let me know your thoughts on RDNA 3 and the 7000 series GPUs. What did you expect? Are you disappointed or not? And how do you see its position against Nvidia's RTX 40 series? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed this video, you know what to do if you did, and see you in the next one.